On this Tuesday night, a new cabinet for a third-term Trudeau government. High-profile promotions and demotions.
Everyone knows that cabinet making requires difficult choices.
The new faces and who's been shuffled out. What happens when mask mandates expire?
We really need to have caution going forward.
Why doctors say it's important to keep covering up. The party's on at Huawei. The big bash to welcome back Meng Wanzhou. And the right to disconnect. One province's proposed bill to make work leave you alone after work.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with some big changes in Ottawa. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has overhauled his slate of cabinet ministers. There are 9 new faces. Some familiar faces are gone, and there's been some shuffling of senior portfolios. Anita Anand, who led the procurement of COVID-19 vaccines, becomes Canada's new defence minister, and Harjit Sajjan, criticized for his handling of sexual misconduct allegations in the military, moves to Minister of International Development. Mélanie Joly is promoted from Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages to Minister of Foreign Affairs, replacing Marc Garneau, who is no longer in cabinet. Steve Guilbeault, an environmental activist from Quebec, is now Minister of Environment and Climate Change, replacing BC's Jonathan Wilkinson, who moves to Natural Resources. There are 39 cabinet ministers in total. Abigial Bimman looks at who's in and who's out in our top story tonight.
It is a big shakeup.
With a refreshed and reinvigorated team around me, I'm really excited about what we're going to be able to accomplish for Canadians, and I know that this team is raring to go.
After the election, Justin Trudeau was already down 4 female ministers. He chose to lose 3 more veterans, Jim Carr, Bardish Chagger, and Foreign Affairs Minister Marc Garneau out.
Everyone knows that cabinet making requires difficult choices.
9 new faces promoted to the inner circle, including Alberta's Randy Boissonnault, popular Nova Scotia MP Sean Fraser, Quebec rookie Pascal Saint-Onge, and 4 MPs from the GTA. Some of the biggest moves: Harjit Sajjan is out at Defence, replaced by Anita Anand.
Minister Anand has been extraordinarily effective, and one of the things that people will be learning about Anita Anand in the coming months is that she is a world-class expert in governance.
Sajjan is demoted to International Development. He came under fire for his handling of the various military misconduct files that have rocked the institution.
Minister Sajjan has consistently been someone who has been there to fight for the women and men who serve in our armed forces and to push back against the culture.
I will put in the necessary work for as long as it takes to get this done. As I have said, I am thorough, I am determined, I am dogged, and I am results-oriented, and I will be dedicating all of my energies towards this task.
This is not about my legacy. This is about serving the women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Mélanie Joly.
While Mélanie Joly gets a big boost to Foreign Affairs Minister. Jean-Yves Duclos promoted to Health, replacing Patty Hajdu, moved to Indigenous Services. There are new portfolios too. Ahmed Hassan is now Minister of Housing, Diversity and Inclusion. Bill Blair's role split in 2. He remains Minister of Emergency Preparedness, while Marco Mendicino is boosted from Immigration to Public Safety. A split at Health, too, and a big move for Carolyn Bennett, who handled Indigenous files since 2015. She's moved out to become the new Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health.
A lot of people, I think, have seen that mental health has become a parallel pandemic.
The new cabinet has time to get up to speed with a month to go before the House returns, and they have more time under Justin Trudeau. Today, he gave a very clear answer, committing to lead his party into the next election, whenever that may be. Donna?
And Abigail, what might we be able to read into this new cabinet and the priorities of Prime Minister Trudeau's new government?
Well, their number one priority is the pandemic, and the Liberals want to act quickly like we saw earlier in the pandemic. Other priorities include housing, childcare, the economy, the environment, and reconciliation. Those are all reflected in the picks for cabinet. Whatever ambitions the Liberals have, they will have to be collaborative if they want to push their minority government's priorities forward. Donna?
All right, Abigial Bimman in Ottawa, thanks. To explore some of the changes in Cabinet in more detail, Mike Couteur is with me, also from Ottawa. Mike, let's start with Mélanie Joly. Her promotion really raises her profile, makes her this government's 5th Foreign Affairs Minister in 6 years. What's the reaction so far?
Well, it certainly raised some eyebrows as she was given the biggest promotion today, especially when you consider her federal political career hasn't exactly been an easy one. She had some difficulties with the heritage portfolio, but then in diplomatic circles, she was credited with helping Canada save face at the Summit of the Francophonie in 2018. Joly negotiated an exit strategy for Michaël Jean, who did not have wide support to run again as the head of that organization. One former Canadian diplomat tells me Joly's appointment is a clear signal to the rest of the world that this government wants to once again promote a feminist foreign policy. So, what about her predecessor, Marc Garneau? Well, he was dropped from cabinet, and it's unclear what will happen to him. There are some rumblings he may be tapped as Canada's next ambassador to France. And you'll remember 4 years ago, Stéphane Dion moved from Foreign Affairs and was appointed as the ambassador of Germany and the EU. Joly, as you said, Donna, will now be Trudeau's 5th Foreign Affairs Minister in the last 6 years.
And Mike, there is a new Minister of Environment and Climate Change as well, Steve Guilbeault, an environmental activist from Quebec, former director of Greenpeace. What might his appointment signal about the government's strategy on that file?
Yeah, some inside the government believe this will send a strong symbolic message that Canada is preparing to more aggressively tackle climate change, especially since Canada is heading to the UN Climate Change Summit next week in Glasgow. Now, in addition to being a founding member of Equitel, the agriculture nonprofit, Guilbeault sat on climate change advisory committees of 3 successive Quebec governments. Now, asked specifically about how this will be received in the energy sector, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that sector is already on board with achieving net zero emissions by the year 2050. And to help in that transition, we can't forget about the former Environment Minister, Jonathan Wilkinson, who was moved to natural resources. Now, with a background in clean tech, he'll be having those difficult conversations with the oil and gas companies to help them transition to a greener future. Donna?
All right, lots of work to do. Mike Couteur in Ottawa, thanks. The new cabinet will put Alberta's already tenuous relationship with the Trudeau government to the test. Premier Jason Kenney has said Alberta is getting a raw deal, and he put the question of federal equalization payments to a referendum. Nearly 62% of Albertans who voted support removing equalization from Canada's constitution. Edmonton, Banff, and Canmore were the only places where the majority of voters disagreed. That does not mean it will happen. Provinces can't unilaterally change the equalization formula, and Premier Kenney himself was in the federal government when the formula was agreed to. So what is this really about? Heather Yourex-West explains.
The Constitution.
Alberta Premier Jason Kenney is calling it a win.
A clear majority, 62% of Albertans have rejected the fundamentally unfair equalization program. In other words, 62% of Albertans are demanding a fair deal in the Canadian Federation.
The referendum held last Monday as part of Alberta's municipal elections asked should the Government of Canada's commitment to the principle of equalization payments be removed from the Constitution. The thing is, that's not exactly what Alberta's government is looking for at all.
When you ask a question to remove something from the Constitution, something that you don't actually have the power to do, but you tell people that you want a mandate to negotiate, it seems odd to me.
Instead, the Alberta Premier wants Ottawa to renegotiate a program so that more money would come back to Alberta during times of economic hardship, a 180 from the position he took as a federal cabinet minister. He also wants some federal energy legislation, the so-called No More Pipelines and tanker ban bills, repealed too.
The Premier decided to ask a non-binding question on a municipal election in Alberta about an equalization formula of which he was one of the authors when he was a minister in Mr. Harper's government. So I think maybe you should ask him what he thought could be achieved by that particular referendum question.
Working against the Alberta Premier, within his own province, the government's popularity has tanked. And within the newly named federal cabinet, there was little to suggest Alberta's interests will be prioritized, particularly when Steve Guilbeault, an outspoken pipeline opponent, is named Federal Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
I think it's more that Trudeau doesn't care what Kenney thinks anymore.
A difficult position to be in for a provincial government hoping to force big federal change. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
The Rogers family feud that has captured the nation's attention is having an impact on more than just the family. Analysts are downgrading the stock, concerned about how the company is governed. As Ann Gaviola explains, the fight is impacting the company's reputation, and that is spooking some investors.
Everything I've done in my life, I've done for my children.
It's been called Canada's Succession, the real-life drama depressing Rogers' share price. On Monday, Rogers common shares saw their biggest sell-off since the market crash at the start of the pandemic. The Rogers family feud puts a spotlight on what can happen in a company with a dual-class share structure, set up so members of the Rogers family, who own about a third of all shares, control nearly 98% of voting power. At the center of the battle, Edward Rogers, son of the company's founder, the late Ted Rogers. He was ousted from the executive board last week after current CEO Joe Natale discovered a plan to unseat him, reportedly via pocket dial. Ironic from the head of Canada's largest wireless player. Edward retaliated by setting up his own board.
We have 2 boards of directors, and you can't have that in a company. You can only have one.
Edward's mother and 2 sisters voted to remove him. In a tweet storm this weekend, Sister Martha Rogers wrote, "I'll gladly blow up my life to stop this." Edward is taking his fight for power to BC's Supreme Court.
I would not be surprised, given the respective deep pockets of the 2 sides of the family, if one of them loses in the BC Supreme Court, then I expect it'll go to the BC Court of Appeals.
Observers say the reputational damage is done.
What people might remember in the next 10 or 15 years is not the incredible success of the founder, Mr. Ted Rogers, but the dispute that is occurring.
And if the saga drags on, it could jeopardize Rogers' takeover of telecom rival Shaw, which still requires regulatory approval. This has consequences for shareholders. Rogers is widely held by pension funds and in mutual funds.
You can have family conflicts, family disputes that trump, let's call it, unbiased, impartial, strategic decision-making.
There's a growing push for Ottawa to look into whether dual-class share structures should continue to be allowed in Canada. Other notable publicly traded companies with this structure include Bombardier and Shaw. Ann Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Defending the coup in Sudan, coming up why the military's top general says the army had to seize power. Plus, Queen Elizabeth cancels another trip. There is more global condemnation after the military takeover in Sudan, the latest in what the head of the UN calls an epidemic of coup d'etat in the African nation. Protesters defied a military-imposed state of emergency, a second day of demonstrations calling for the country's democratic transition to continue. And today, the Army's top general said the Prime Minister is being held at his residence. Other civilian government officials have also been detained. The head of the Army claims the takeover of the country's transitional government was necessary to avert a civil war. The military and civilian parties have shared power for 2 years, and the transition, which may now be in peril, would see Sudan come under civilian control for the first time in more than 30 years. China has placed the city of Langzhou, home to 4 million people, under lockdown. The restrictions were imposed after 29 new cases of COVID-19 were reported in China. 6 of those are people who live in Langzhou. Residents have been told not to leave home unless it's an emergency. With even a handful of cases, China has been implementing regional lockdowns to avoid further spread of the virus. This is Meng Wanzhou returning to work at Huawei's headquarters in China. She is the CFO of Huawei and the daughter of its founder. She spent nearly 3 years under house arrest in Canada, fighting extradition to the U.S., and was allowed to go home after reaching an agreement with U.S. prosecutors last month. Her return was live streamed by state media. Ahead, as provinces wind down pandemic restrictions, will mask mandates be next to go?
You're watching Global National.
Key advisors to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration have voted overwhelmingly to recommend the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for children aged 5 to 11. The next step is for the U.S. Centers for Disease Control to review the FDA's decision and make its own recommendation. Its advisory group is set to meet next week. If authorization is granted, about 28 million children in the U.S. will be eligible for the vaccine. The White House says it has millions of doses ready to be rolled out. Pfizer says the vaccine is 91% effective against COVID-19 in children aged 5 to 11. In British Columbia, a mandate is now in place requiring all healthcare workers to be vaccinated. The province says most workers have complied, but there are 4,090 workers who have not. They will now be placed on unpaid leave and must receive a first dose by November 15th if they want to keep their jobs, unless they have a medical exemption. As more people get vaccinated across Canada, more places are lifting pandemic restrictions. Mask mandates were slow to be put in place in Canada, and now there's discussion about when and whether to lift them. Jamie Maracher reports.
Heart transplant recipient Mike Willis can't just rely on his vaccinations to safeguard him from COVID.
I'm good with people wearing a mask. Someone wearing a mask protects me more than it does them. It helps prevent the spread of droplets, which is basically one of the biggest spreads for COVID.
Mask mandates have been the standard pretty much countrywide, but those protections are slowly being lifted, with plans to remove them in Saskatchewan next month and early next year in Ontario and possibly Quebec.
We also know that when we lose mask mandates, voluntary mask use goes down.
Dr. Catherine Clace, who runs a website on effective masking, says when that happens, COVID, especially the Delta variant, can surge.
And we saw that in the UK, and we see the problem that they're having with transmission in the UK right now.
And we've seen it here at home. In Alberta, no masks and low vaccination rates caused a near collapse of its ICUs. Doctors there don't want to see history repeat itself.
The question that we don't know is how high of a vaccination rate is good enough to be a measure as a standalone measure. And I think we really need to have caution going forward that this is really a combination deal.
A combination of vaccinating the next eligible population, kids 5 to 11, increasing hospital capacity, tracking COVID cases closely, and keeping our masks on.
Masking should be probably the last thing that we remove.
Anything sooner, medical experts worry, is a political move without Canadians' health in mind. Jamie Maracher, Global News, Toronto.
Queen Elizabeth is not going to the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, Scotland. Buckingham Palace says the 95-year-old monarch is disappointed about the cancellation, but she will still deliver a video address. The Queen is now back at work after spending a night in hospital last week. Doctors have advised her to rest. Today, she did hold virtual meetings with ambassadors at her home in Windsor Castle. The right to disconnect next. One province's proposed solution to ensure work stays at work. In Japan, a member of the royal family has married her longtime boyfriend and lost her status as a princess. Princess Macco quietly married her college sweetheart, who works as a lawyer in New York. Under Japanese law, female members of the imperial family forfeit their status if they marry a commoner. Male members do not. The couple has been under intense media scrutiny and plagued by a scandal involving borrowed money. Macco says she is determined to build a happy life with her husband in New York. Well, the pandemic and technology has changed how we work, and for many people, the working day has been extended. The line between work and home life has become so blurred, some people never really switch off. Now, Ontario is considering a law that would give employees the right to disconnect and turn off during their time off. Mike Joly explains.
It no longer matters where you are, in the office, at home, on the street in the cold. That anxiety-inducing notification on our phones will find us, and at all hours. Well, leave it to France to start the revolution, which it did in 2016 by giving workers the right to disconnect after work. It's an idea Ontario is trying to emulate.
We're taking a side, and it's the side of workers.
It makes for a nice soundbite, but employment experts don't see how you can legislate in a world economy.
Frankly, it makes no sense at all. Let's assume you're dealing with China. Let's assume you're dealing with Taiwan or North Korea or South Korea or any other country that's a trading partner. You better not be disconnected at nighttime because that's when they're open.
I don't know how long we're going to see this seismic shift when it comes to employee empowerment, but this sort of quiet revolution we've seen to start working from home, adding in flexibility, that is going to continue.
Still, Mario Zelaya likes the idea. When he started up Bad Axe Throwing in 2014, his target wasn't the bullseye. It was to get away from 80-hour work weeks in marketing. Expanding Bad Axe to over 30 locations in North America took work, yet he did it with his own policy of no business after 5.
I find it more expensive to lose people. Having to hire someone else takes a long time. Seeing if they're the right fit, train them, build them up, and just burn them out. Like it doesn't make any sense.
The market spoke to him, and he listened by turning off all notifications. Mike Joly, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Your Canada Tonight is a moment from the cabinet swearing in at Rideau Hall in Ottawa today. Algonquin elder Claudette Commanda asked the Creator to bless those taking on the responsibility of being a cabinet minister. Here's part of what she said. Thanks for watching.
And I ask the Creator that the great gift that He will give you is that you understand, you embrace, and you walk daily with the 7 grandfathers. Wisdom, love, respect, honesty, courage, humility, and truth. And let us come together, brothers and sisters. Let us raise our voice in our heart with love. And together, let us say together that we acknowledge the ancestors, that we honor the children of yesteryear, today, and tomorrow. For indeed, we all know that children are sacred, and we have a responsibility to love and to care and to ensure that all children matter. And let us together say, miigwech, merci, thank you.